and we'll keep the conversation open today. I want to review a little bit of the previous mimer, because to me it's really so fundamental, and I don't want any of the ideas to be lost. But I also want to go through, this is the 10th mimer that we've learned. So I want to go through them. I think there are four of them that were probably, I would say, on the difficult side of things, and 6 of them that are on the crucial, fundamental level. You know, I don't think that we are studying anything that can be considered basic in any way. This is not Judaism for dummies in any way whatsoever. But I do want to, because we have such a short half-hour time period, sometimes I'm trying to cover ground and I'm not quite sure exactly where people are holding, whether people really are fully absorbing the power of the ideas. So I want to kind of go back through them. We'll give a little bit of a synopsis of each one of the Maimarim that we've done, and what, at least I believe, what I get from them, and specifically how they drive me. So it's purely on a personal perspective, and I hope that you guys will share your own perspectives as well, and questions, and of course try to dig deeper into it. So the general purpose of Chassidus, and perhaps the next mimer, it was actually not a mimer that we'll learn, but the next essay that we'll learn is one that's referred to as On the Essence of Chassidus, which is itself a phenomenal essay. And in that, we'll be able to really see how the Rebbe uncovers the purpose of Chassidus. But the purpose of Chassidus, in a general form, is to uncover the relationship between us and God, and to crack open the deeper elements of godliness being within every single thing in the world, with every single state, within every single thing. And there's a big difference between what we might refer to as a bumper sticker Judaism and the actual intellectual investment into something. So the bumper sticker, of course, you can put, thank you Hashem or something like that on your bumper, on your car, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But somebody doesn't encapsulate all of Judaism based in one pithy line. You can't really uncover the depth of Judaism unless you break into the study itself, because the study gives you the perspective of depth. The study gives you the perspective as it is in any particular discussion. And so that's the purpose of each one of these Maimarim. When we're trying to talk about, let's say, for example, the concept, which most of the Maimarim that we discussed refer to the idea of Avodat Hashem, serving God. What does that mean? So we can say in a general form that serving God is it's important to man's existence because man was formed for that purpose. We can say that in general, of course, we're supposed to fulfill the Torah and the mitzvot. But then you start getting into the question of, okay, what's the value of one person's fulfillment of Torah and mitzvot versus another? You have somebody who has tremendous capabilities. You have another person who does not. You have one person who's born religious and has had the opportunity their entire lives. You have somebody else who was not given that opportunity. You have some people who only find out that they're Jewish way at the end of their lives, and so was their entire life purposeless? God forbid. It's, if you're looking at it from a purely you know, layered perspective that you have this person who's greater than that person, then it seems to be very, very callous, because this person has had all the opportunities in the world, and this person has not. And so therefore, how does that match up? Susan, go ahead.
Didn't the Rebbe say there was no difference from
yes,
a Jew who
that's exactly what I'm getting to.
Oh,
that's exactly.
Okay, sorry.
But when we talk about the fact that there's no difference, you know, when we talk, or you know, we're going to talk about differences actually. But when we talk about these ideas, we can talk about these ideas in a very generic way, and then you don't comprehend the depth of the concept. And so then it can become very, very touchy-feely. I like to describe it as cotton candy. You know, it might be sweet, but it's got no substance whatsoever. It doesn't do anything for you. There's nothing there. And so the purpose of these maimarim are to crack into these ideas and to show you that these ideas are not just simplistic. They're not just coming from a, you know, the, like we said, the bumper sticker side of things. You know, we can make everybody feel good by saying that, okay, everybody's equal and all that kind of thing. That's not at all where it's coming from. It's coming from a very, very deep place. And that's really what that's where we're driving in.
What, if any, connection there was to that shooting?
We have to mute people.
Please unmute yourselves if you have any questions or comments. I really do. This is meant to be a little bit more of a discussion than a minimum, you know, than a text-based, just a text-based conversation. So the concept, go ahead, Robert, go ahead.
I guess I wanted to, what Susan said has sort of been ricocheting in my mind, because I remember we had the discussion where the comment was, well, somebody says I'm a bad Jew. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's no such thing as a bad Jew. It's when one understands his or her Judaism or where they fit into the continuum of being Jewish. I guess that's the way to put it. So there's no value of being bad, is that you don't know or you've not been enlightened as to the relevancy of being an observant Jew. That's the best, or understanding your relationship with Hashem. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
Right. And so in the Maimer bshaa shekhikdimu, we actually took that up a step. Because we did this entire process as not being one as something that's all or nothing, but being one as comparable to the ramp. And on the ramp, there's always the connection with the top.
Right.
As opposed to that, when you're making a statement that I am here and I am not there, you're making a statement that this is my Judaism, that is not my Judaism. And by defining yourself in a negative state, as a result, the person loses the connection. You're not, you know, you are disassociating yourself from something as opposed to connecting. And that itself is such a remarkable idea, and that's such an important idea, both with regards to ourselves, because we always fall into this pitfall ourselves, because we know our skills, we know our competencies, and we know also what we're not good at, and we know also what we don't enjoy. There are many elements of Judaism that we don't necessarily relate to. And when we look at things from the perspective of where we are not, that's a disconnection. And that's what we're trying to stay away from. And on the other hand, when we look at everything in terms of what my connection is and how I'm trying to propel myself forward, that's a critical part of the idea. Let's take Tevye for a second. Let's take Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. I hate Fiddler on the Roof with a deep passion.
Me too.
Okay, there we go. Okay, well, Susan, why do you hate Tevye? Or why do you hate Fiddler?
Because it's very superficial. And it's Chazarai. It's Chazarai. I'm sorry. I always felt that way.
It's extremely, extremely superficial. That's correct.
Okay.
One of the things I hate most about Fiddler is, why do we do it? It's tradition. Talk to me about that, everybody. Where does that hold in the conversation that we've had so far?
We don't do it just for tradition. We are bound. We are special. Hashem calls out to us every time we wake up.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And the problem with Tavia's perspective is that he is unlettered, illiterate, and he's doing absolutely nothing to be able to correct that.
Because it's tradition, that's why.
That's exactly it. He is happy with his cluelessness. Now,
right.
Shalom Aleichem, who wrote Tevye, and he wrote many other stories, he was virulently anti-religious. And Fiddler on the Roof was originally actually supposed to be a sarcastic take on the religious communities, and people don't realize that it's actually a negative approach to Judaism. I mean, even though that people, kind of it has the nostalgia of the shtetl life and all that kind of stuff, and that's the reason why people connected to it. But at the same time, they forget that Shalom Aleichen's purpose was not to bring the nostalgia, but to attack, what do you call it? It was satire. Ben, go ahead, and then Robert.
Yeah, I want to say that in those times, especially before Hasidus, a lot of people did it because of tradition. They didn't really know, they didn't really study the religion. They were working, they hardly could make a living. They didn't have time for those things. So for them, it was tradition. So many people were just doing it from tradition. And actually, maybe he was trying to bring out in that play that you should learn, you should get into it. Don't just say tradition.
In that case, I'm all for it.
Right. So in my take of it is that our life as Jews was miserable. And most, as Ben said, Jews were uneducated, but they knew they had to do something without being able to intellectually or emotionally understand it. So what it became was, again, it was like a very thin, but very wide, an inch, like an inch wide and whatever millimeters, because again, and it was also, again, nostalgic because most of us in this country came from Eastern European Jews who lived who were ghettoized. And that brings back how it was without understanding how terrible it was and how we were subjugated and segregated by everyone. So it became a popular, nostalgic retrospect of Jewish life in the ghetto, which is untrue. It was terrible.
That's right. I appreciate
it. Wasn't a ghetto, it was called the shtetl.
Well, all right. So the shtetl was one factor, but the ghetto was where the majority of Jews were packed into.
Maybe in a city, yeah.
Right, but right. So I must be from the city, and you're a country boy. I don't know, but in any case, it's the same thing, anyways. Right.
That's absolutely true, and just to toss on that, my mother's parents came from Ukraine, from outside of Kiev, in the early teens. And my grandfather's first wife died in childbirth, I think in 1945 or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what year it was that she died. And then afterwards, my grandfather married my grandmother. So he had 3 daughters from his first wife, and my mother and her sister from a second wife. So my mother's oldest half sister, I guess, was 15 years older than her. And she grew up as an American in the United States, but she grew up surrounded by people with a very, very dark image of Judaism. And so their whole perspective was, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And it was all, when my mother started becoming observant in the 70s, the early 70s, she was like, why in heaven's name would you want to possibly connect with those people? Because there was no joy, there was no intellectual interest, there was none of that. And then at my mother's wedding, the bar was on the women's side of the mechitza. She apparently had a really good job. She was like, oh, these aren't as bad as the ones I grew up with. But those were that you're describing that, that were in the shtetl in terms of the negativity. You're absolutely right. The pogroms and the poverty and the darkness that was associated with European Jewry, which very much had to do with the very, very low level of economic ability. Robert, go ahead.
I just growing up, there was a very famous Eastern European Jewish photographer named Roman Vishniak, if anybody's ever seen his work. And he smuggled cameras into the ghettos, into the shtetls. And what struck me as so terrible was that grandfatherly men with long beards and kippot, strimals, they were the beast of burden. They pulled the sleds, the wagons, because that's the only way they could make a living. And these are men who should have been studying or living their golden years, but there was no umbrellas, there was no safety net or anything. You worked until you couldn't work any longer. So that always affected me in understanding how miserable Jewish history had been before the turn of the century.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So I think with all of that, that reminding us that the purpose of all this is to be able to elicit certain capabilities within ourselves. The intellectual, the emotional, and the applicational. So everything that we're learning is done in a Chabad style where you're taking an intellectual idea, you're trying to figure out how to connect to it, how to drive your feelings with it, and practically speaking, to change how we interact with the world. That's the general approach. Now, this was very, very, I don't want to say it was radical, but it was difficult for a lot of people, even for Chabad, some of the great Chabad people. Many of them were very focused on the intellectual side of things. So you had some of these people who were intense scholars who could meditate on ideas for 5, 6, 7 hours at a time. So they had these abilities that were completely beyond us. At the same time, those people were, oftentimes, like we said, disassociated, oftentimes with their families, and were not necessarily fully able to connect with the world, so to speak. And this is a very, very difficult struggle for these people on these highest of levels. You're trying to take these deeply spiritual and powerful ideas, and you're trying to apply them into our world. You're trying to, on one hand, recognize the godliness and everything, at the same time, have a family and support the family and deal with mundane things. But that incredible struggle is really at the crux of everything that we're talking about here. Susan, go ahead.
They were not well integrated at all. They were either scholars or workers, okay? And I saw that in my grandfather. And I guess my parents understood the importance of being well integrated into society, but also smart about what you're doing and being a good practicing observant Jew. In other words, my parents were raised in Orthodox. I was raised as conservative, but my parents understood that we had to be educated, not just in society, but about our being, about Judaism, except that I never learned Torah. This is the very first time. My three brothers learned Torah. I didn't learn Torah, but I was the oldest.
Right. But there is a tradition of women not learning Torah. Okay.
Right.
That was not your place in life to do that.
Right. And now I get the chance.
That's right. And that is very, very much not in line with the way the Chabad movement ran itself. Going back all the way to the Alter Rebbe himself and his relationship with his wife and his daughters, and even his mother. And if you want to read, about the roots of that whole conversation, you can read the series of books, 3 books, but you can typically find the first 2. The third is more difficult to find, called Lubavitcher Rebbe's Memoirs, which are the family story, the family history of how Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi's father came to the Chassidic world. And it goes very much through the shtetls of the time, very much through the politics of the spiritual politics of the time. So it's really, really a fascinating depiction of what things were like in the mid-1700s when people were trying to kind of balance out this whole conversation, the Chassidic approach versus the standard approach of the time, how the two of them work together. But it all centers on this idea of Avodat Hashem, serving God, the concept of serving God. And serving God in a simplistic way is studying Torah and doing mitzvot. And what we've been introducing through these Maimarim, the majority of these Maimarim, is that Avodat Hashem is not simply one of just doing what you're told. It's something of much deeper devotion and connection with God. And that devotion and connection is applicable to any person, no matter where they are. And that's really the novelty of everything that we've been discussing, because on the one hand, you have people who are, not very learned or have not had very many experiences. On the other hand, you have people on the greatest and the highest of levels. And these Maimarim have been giving keys and clues to everybody equally, that everybody can apply within their own world. And just a little discussion, about this concept of checking boxes. There's a series of books called The Maggid Speaks. And it's written by a well-known historian who is not of the Hasidic persuasion at all. His name is Rabbi Pesach Kron. And he juxtaposed 2 stories, one versus the other, which really give us an insight into the difference between the Hasidic approach and the non-Hasidic approach, and really give us an insight into what is serving God and what is checking the boxes. And this, I'm telling these stories not, God forbid, to put anybody down, but just simply to juxtapose the attitude that can be extrapolated from the 2 stories and how we can understand this idea of Avodat Hashem through that. The first story that he told was the story of Reb Shmelka of Nikolsburg, who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. He was a major rabbi in Germany of the time, Hamburg, I think. Nikolsburg became other names of other cities. I don't remember exactly what it turned into at some other point. But he was known to be an intensely spiritual person, a Rebbe of sorts. And he once asked his Gabbai for whatever, a fruit, an apple, let's say. As the Gabbai was a simple Jew, goes gets the rabbi a fruit and goes to get him a fruit. And the 2 of them are sitting there eating, and they make the bracha, and they're eating an apple. And the Gabbai is thinking, well, see, what's the difference between me and the rabbi? And both of us are sitting here eating apples. Suddenly, Reb Shmelka turns to the Gabbai and says, what's the difference between me and you? We're both sitting here eating apples. The Gabbai said, Rabbi, I was just thinking that. I don't know. What's the difference? He says, the difference between us is that when you want an apple, you get an apple, you make a blessing, and you eat the apple. When I want to make a blessing, I get an apple. So the physicality is a means, is a mechanism for serving God. So that's story number one. So Rabbi Krohn in the book writes, well, this is similar to another story, and I don't know who the person was, and it doesn't really make a difference, but it's a modern, contemporary Rosh Hashiva went to somebody's house, and when he was at the person's house, he asked for a drink and a fruit. They had their conversation, and towards the end of the conversation, he got up to go, but he did not eat the fruit, he did not drink the water, whatever it was. And so the host asked him, he said, you asked for a drink and you asked for a fruit and you didn't partake. What's going on? And so the rabbi explained, he says, we have the halacha states that we have to say 100 blessings every single day. And I know that at this point of the day, I usually have 98. So I wanted to make sure to hit the other two. But I realized I got an aliyah this morning, so I already had the extra two. So I didn't need the water and the apple. So can somebody tell me what's the difference between the two stories?
Who's counting? We're not supposed to be counting how many blessings we make. That's not the point.
And eat an apple.
What was that?
In one case,
he
they
didn't
ate
eat
the apple.
So he didn't make the bracha. So the counting by itself, the fact that halacha says that you have to make 100 blessings every day, that itself shows that he's invested in his Judaism because he wants to do the right thing. And so there's no question that this rabbi is of a significant level, but you can't compare the two stories and say that they're equal because, like Mr. Jakubowicz, I think it is, said, he didn't make the blessing. He said, I don't need to. Once I hit my 100, I don't need the connection anymore. I'm finished. I don't need it. And so that shows a certain, okay, I've done what I have to and I don't need to do any more. And so there's a certain, and it may not have been, he may not have been thinking this in the actual story, but when you juxtapose the two stories, one vis-a-vis the other, there's that element that comes out. The question is your service of God an ends for yourself, that I have done what I have to, or is your service of God a connection to God? And in terms of that, it's never a matter of what I have to. It's always a matter of trying to go deeper and trying to go further and higher and deepen the connection, as opposed to do even the very best of, but basically what I have to. Robert, you're about to say something?
No, I'm trying to, one of the things I've always, when I study is to understand, to parse the difference between Haskalah and Haredim, because I think there's this continuum where Lubavitch falls on the continuum of Orthodox Judaism. To me, Chabad and the movement is joyously practicing Judaism than the stern sort of doctorate element of and I don't mean to be negative about it, but there's a different value in what Chassids through Lubavitch. It's a joy to be Jewish, and you don't have to worry about expressing your joy about it. Well, in other streams of Judaism, Orthodox, it's like you can't show any, if not gratitude, celebration for being Jewish. It's too serious. So I've always struggled with those definitions, and that's part of what I'm doing.
Rabbi Yehuda has his hand up. Yehuda has his hand up, Rabbi.
Ed, sorry, you're not on my 9-person screen here, so sometimes I miss the extra. So go ahead, Yehuda.
Yeah, I took the second story to be negative. It's a joy to say a bracha. So if you have to count and you have enough, you never have enough brachas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why it's very difficult for me to juxtapose the two of them. The concept of Avodat Hashem is that you're trying to connect. And, Robert, to get back to what you're saying here, there was there are certain stereotypes to certain, Jews who come from different areas. The German Jews, the Yeke, they're typically very straight-laced.
Well, they were assimilated. You should be, right. Mendelssohn never said you should be a mensch on the outside and be a Jew at home, differentiating between there's something wrong with being Jewish all the time.
Exactly. You need to be very straight-laced. You need to be in a box. So there are many people who picked up those stereotypes and they transferred that into their Judaism. And so therefore, the Judaism became very, very straight-laced, very, very stale, very serious.
Constricting. Yeah, I use the word constricting. Yeah.
I would venture to say that in most of the Orthodox world today, that has somewhat broken down. And I think that has a lot to do with the influence that the Chassidic movement in general has had across the entire system.
Sure.
Without question, this idea of serving is one that has, without question, has really, shall we say, infiltrated into the system. There's an understanding that it's not just the intellectual giants that are the ones that can connect to God. It's anybody that can connect to God. And that idea, it's taken a long time to take root, but it's very, very much one that has begun to settle. And thankfully, I think everybody's benefiting as a result. So next week, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through each one of the Maimarim that we will summarize the Maimar and summarize where the Maimar brings some of these ideas in and how it explains, shall we say, the novelty, the tweak on the concepts that the Rebbe introduces. How do we serve God? Why do we serve God? What is service of God? Does God truly care? And all of these things, we're going to go through them. It'll be really a summary of the things that we've discussed, but we'll try to go through them. That way everybody can not just take each essay as, just basically one particular differentiated essay, but really to see them as a continuous flow of these ideas that the Rebbe was inculcating all of us with. So that's what we'll do over the next few weeks until we take the next one. I think we'll take, Rabbi Smith, I told you, I sent you one link, but I think instead we'll do the essence of Chassidus instead, which is also a lot of fun. All right.
Thank you very much,
everybody have a
Rabbi
wonderful,
Yasmin.
wonderful day. Absolutely. We'll continue the discussion Friday.